You got nice, neat little package. Like they've had a proper. It feels like there's a really nice sentiment to them, like proper backstory. And then there was one called 75p drinks. Hi guys, welcome back to Interval Conversations. I'm so glad to be joined today by my good friend Patrick McCallion. Now, we've gone international a few times on this podcast. We're now in Amsterdam, finally. So, Patrick, how are you doing?
Hey man, I'm really good, thank you. How are you?
I'm very good. It's good to see you after
Good to see
quite,
you too. It's been a while.
yeah, a couple of years. I see the hair's more tamed now. Looks a bit
It
more.
is a little, yeah, which is odd. Odd for lockdown. We're in a full lockdown here in the Netherlands as well again. So it means that like all the hairdressers are shut again. So hopefully it doesn't go too wild.
Yeah, not like the old Afro days.
No, long gone.
So, for those of you who don't know Patrick McCallion, he is a singer songwriter and he is absolutely brilliant. He was founder of one of my favourite bands, Small Words Army Unite. Just listening to him the other day, I was like, oh, I remember all the gigs.
Good old days. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's funny. Like I've had to it's rare that I come across the recordings now as well because they're all just like scattered on my hard drives and stuff. But yeah, every now and again I listen back to them and I just think, "Oh man."
Yeah. Just
It takes me back.
listening to Burn Me Out, and I instinctively went bum bum bum. If you know,
A
you know.
classic, stone cold classic.
So, before we get into all that again, how did you actually first get involved in this industry? Where did your love for music start?
Yeah, so I guess my love for music started very young. It will have started with my family, my parents. We're a musical family in as much as my family have just always loved music. It was a big part of growing up was listening to music in the car, stuff like that. My dad was really into kind of punk music and a lot of rock that I got kind of accustomed to growing up. And yeah, historically, my family has been really into kind of Irish music as well, and that kind of sort of Celtic music, like traditional kind of Irish folky Dubliners, the Pogues, that sort of stuff. So that was really a big part growing up as well, and it was all kind of around that I started wanting to perform, I suppose. Um, and yeah, my real first, I guess, start as a musician was doing acoustic singer-songwritery stuff. I remember I did my first gig, I think, when I was like 13 years old, around then in one of the pubs in Halifax. And yeah, it just kind of went from there. Small Words, like you mentioned, that was like that was just something that kind of emerged from being in school and being friends with a lot of musicy people. That just eventually kind of came from that, and it's all just kind of been a progression from there, very slowly, steadily, and I think quite naturally as well.
Because over the years, it's built up from like doing pub gigs and solo acts to opening for Bingley Music Fest. You done Beer Keller, all those. So, could you tell us about some of those gigs from over the years? Do you have any personal highlights?
Yeah, man, there's been a few. Like you say, it really started off in the kind of the pub scene, and that's like such a hugely important part of what I do. I still rely on a lot of that stuff that I developed in those sorts of crowds now, doing the stuff with the new nostalgia and just gigging generally. It's I still rely on a lot of those skills quite frequently. Um, but yeah, in terms of gig highlights, there's been loads. Like I did an acoustic gig recently at a very big venue in Amsterdam called Paradiso, which is like one of the big venues in the city, and that was a real highlight, particularly because it came sort of bang in the middle of coronavirus, and it was like a socially distant show in that sort of week or two where things were relaxed for a little while. And yeah, that was great because that's a venue that I would never be able to play in regular times, but because it was socially distant and it was acoustic, it just all kind of came together, and that was a real highlight. And yeah, you mentioned Bingley as well. I think about those Bingley shows really sort of fondly. because it just felt like a group trip, really.
Yeah.
It felt like it felt like a school trip or something. Like it was like we're all just going to leave Halifax for a day and go to Bingley and just hang out at this festival, and we just happened to play it as well. So yeah, those are two real gigs that I think about quite a lot.
Yeah. So, who would you class your musical influences when you're writing?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely changed over time. Like when I was starting out doing acoustic stuff, I was really into sort of Bruce Springsteen, Bob Dylan, that kind of folk singer-songwriter crowd. Um, when I was doing the small word stuff, I was really into kind of the big sort of stadium rock bands. So I was really into the Killers and Green Day, Foo Fighters, this kind of thing. And then yeah, as I've got older, my tastes have changed. They've matured. And now it's a real variety of stuff when I'm writing music. It just depends what I'm listening to, really. I'm really big into kind of Arcade Fire at the moment. I think the way that they write songs is very similar to kind of Bruce Springsteen, and I always find myself kind of fluttering around these sort of lyrical storytellers when I'm writing music.
What is your creative process when writing songs? Because being biased, but you
Yeah.
have come out with some proper bangers over the years.
Oh,
So it's like,
thank you. That's very kind.
so it's like what? Put my teeth back in today. Can't speak. What is your process for writing a song?
Yeah, I mean, really, it's very varied and it changes. Um, a lot of the time, my writing process is just waiting until I feel like I'm in the right spot to kind of write something like that. Um, I find that I'm always more inclined to write music when I'm doing a lot of reading. So I try to kind of read as much as I can, just because once you kind of get accustomed with these sort of like textual patterns with how people are writing and authors that I like, that kind of gets me in a good headspace to do stuff like this. And then often when I'm writing, it feels like I read there's a guy called Blind Boy who does a lot of he's with an Irish band called the Rubber Bandits. But I remember reading about his kind of creative process, and he said it often feels like you're finding the song rather than actually writing it, and it does often feel like that. I'll just be sort of playing around with chords, and it feels like I'm kind of remembering the song rather than writing it, which is something that I've always found interesting. I don't know where that comes from. I think it's all just about kind of getting yourself in the right headspace, and eventually kind of it all seems to come together eventually.
So, like some of the songs you've written over the year, like you got nice, neat little package. Like they've had a proper. It feels like there's a really nice sentiment to them, like proper backstory. And then there was one called 75p drinks.
That was a different tone.
Completely different. If you don't know 75p drinks, there's a certain establishment in Halifax where they sell drinks at that price. And try and think what you, because it was a proper fast lyrical song. Then you put was it Lord of the Dance? You put in at the
Yeah,
end.
Lord of the Dance at the
Yeah,
end. You see, this is that's a perfect
yeah,
kind of summary of where my head was when I was doing a lot of the small word stuff, because a lot of these songs were written sort of at the end of high school towards the start of university and going to college. And it was just kind of like that's a really manic time where it's like a lot of the kind of influence you don't have that much life experience, so you write about what you know. And at that point in my life, what I knew was going to the Acapulco in Halifax for 75p drinks. So yeah, a lot of those songs from around that time, some people would say it's kind of an immaturity, but it's an immaturity that I like, because
oh,
it listening back to them now, it's just like that's exactly what it was growing up in Halifax and being at that point in my life.
yeah. Because since Halifax, as we mentioned, you've moved to Amsterdam, and now you work for Grace Note. So could you tell us about that? How did that come about?
Yeah, man. That was just I sort of after I graduated university, I spent I guess about a year and a half in the south of England, and then moved back up to Halifax. And it was just a case of wanting to go somewhere a bit different, I suppose. I'd spoken to it about, I've been talking with my girlfriend about it for a while, and it was like, yeah, let's look to do this. And she ended up getting a job offer out here in the Netherlands. And so I just started looking out here as well. Came across Grace Note, which is a really nice company. And I've been here now coming up on, I guess, 4 years now, coming up on 5. The plan was to stay here for like a year, maybe a year and a half, 2 years. And we just stayed. It's just a really nice part of the world. It's a cool place to live.
Hopefully, I'll manage to get over at some point.
Well, you see, this is the problem. Like, it's COVID's just kind of shut everything down, of course. And in a weird way, I'm in contact with people more now because everyone knows how to work Zoom and everyone knows how to work Messenger and all this stuff. But yeah, it's such a shame. It's nice having people out here, and yeah, it's missed.
Because what is the music scene like over there? Like, what's the atmosphere?
Yeah, it's super interesting over here. It's I find like Amsterdam in particular is a city where it's really easy to be creative. Like, it's a very arty city, and when you do gigs out here, the kind of music scene feels very closely linked to sort of like the art school scene. So there's a lot more experimentation out here, I find, in terms of music, in terms of what sort of gigs are being put on and what sort of acts are being booked. It's a lot kind of more, there's more of a flow to it. So you can often play gigs with bands from entirely different genres, or even like from other different art forms. You can be working with dancers, you can be working with, you know, poets. It feels very kind of New Yorky in a way. But there's less structure here than there is in the UK. So like when I'm doing gigs with my current band, well, yes, of course not at the moment. But yeah, like when I'm doing gigs with my band, The New Nostalgia, in England, it's quite easy to get the gigs because it's like, well, I want to do a gig in Leeds. I'm just going to look up the band nights in Leeds and we'll do a band night in Leeds. But yeah, over here, you really have to work to put a show together. You have to like book a venue. You have to program it yourself. Like, it's a lot more DIY, and I really like that. But it's definitely got less of a structure, I think.
So, can we expect any new songs from you anytime soon? Obviously, with The New Nostalgia, do stuff for yourself. Can we expect any new songs?
I really hope so. Like, it's it all comes down to when we can next get back into the studio and record, because we have basically an album's worth of music ready to go. It's just being able to get the band together, because obviously I'm over here in the Netherlands, the band are based in London, so it's just difficult getting that together. As soon as we can, we're going to get back in and we're going to record some new music. But yeah, it's just a case of biding our time at the moment, I think.
Fair enough. So I just have one last question for you. Do you have any advice for anyone wanting to get into this industry?
Let me think. What's good advice? I think the best advice is to make music that you enjoy. And I know that sounds really sort of kind of predictable advice, but it's advice that I didn't take for a very long time. And I think there really is a pressure in the music industry to write music that you think will do well on the radio, or write music that you think will be popular, to write, you know, to overthink this kind of thing. And you end up making music that you don't particularly like yourself, but you think is ticking lots of boxes. And like, and the best case scenario, if you do that, is you get popular making music that you don't like, and it just becomes a nightmare. But the other side of that is if you're doing music that you really like, regardless of kind of how popular you think it might be, or how mainstream it might be, then you are going to end up you're going to be enjoying what you're doing constantly, and it will always feel like a hobby. And it's really easy, particularly when you get to the point in a music career where you're gigging really regularly, you're traveling a lot, you're doing all this stuff, and it is a hassle and it's an admin nightmare. If you're doing all of that admin to kind of go and do shows where you're kind of making music that you really enjoy and you really engage with and you can really get behind, then it all seems worthwhile, and it's just better as well. The music will naturally be better if it's something that, I don't know, that you can kind of get behind fully, as opposed to doing it as like a science, I suppose.
Yeah, that's some brilliant advice there. Paddy, thank you so much for joining me today. Where can people find the band pages?
Yeah, so I guess you're best doing we're New Nostalgia UK on everything. So Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and then of course we're on Spotify, Apple Music, all these places too.
Yeah, links will be below. But Paddy, thank you so much for joining me. It's been lovely seeing you.
No worries. I hope we can catch up again soon. I'd like to go to the Circle Lounge. It's been a while.
Same.
I can imagine.
Yeah. Well, we managed to get 4 weeks out in October of work. Then we closed again.
There you go.
Did go, but thank you for joining me, and thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of Interval Conversations.